The clay pot shattered into 1,000 pieces on the concrete floor of the small bedroom in Lagos. Grandma Martha's wrinkled hands shook as she held the remaining piece, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. What she had just seen inside that native pot would change everything forever.
No.
No, this cannot be real, she whispered, her voice trembling like leaves in the harmattan wind. Behind her, she could hear footsteps running up the stairs. Her daughter-in-law Grace was coming, probably wondering what the loud crash was about. Grandma Martha's heart pounded like drums at a village festival. She knew that, in just a few seconds, everything would explode like thunder in the rainy season. But how did it all begin? How did a sweet old woman who only wanted to love her son's family end up discovering something so terrible that it made her hands shake with fear? 3 months earlier, Grandma Martha hummed her favorite Igbo praise song as she swept the small compound of her son's house in Surulere, Lagos. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the red sand, and she felt grateful to be living with her only son, Charles, and his wife, Grace. At 72 years old, she thought her days of loneliness were over. "Mama," Charles called from inside the house. "Come and eat breakfast." She smiled and dropped her broom, dusting off her old wrapper before walking into the house. The smell of fried plantain and beans filled the air, making her stomach growl with hunger. But when she entered the small dining room, her smile slowly faded. There were only 2 plates on the table, one for Charles and one for Grace. Her daughter-in-law sat across from her son, eating her food with quick, sharp movements, like a bird picking its seeds. "Where is my food?" Grandma Martha asked quietly. Grace looked up with cold eyes. "Oh, Mama, I forgot to cook extra food. Maybe you can eat the leftover rice from yesterday." Charles looked uncomfortable but said nothing. He kept his eyes on his plate, chewing his food slowly. Grandma Martha felt a small pain in her chest, but she nodded and went to the kitchen. The leftover rice was hard and cold, but she ate it without complaining. This was not the first time, and deep in her heart, she feared it would not be the last. As the days passed, things got worse, much worse. "Mama, the clothes are dirty," Grace would shout from the living room while painting her nails bright red. "Wash them before evening, or we will have nothing clean to wear tomorrow." The old woman's back ached as she bent over the washing basin in the backyard. Her hands, once smooth and strong, were now rough and wrinkled from all the soap and scrubbing. She watched her son through the window, sitting on the sofa and watching television while his wife ordered her around like a house girl. Why doesn't Charles say anything? She wondered, tears mixing with the soap water. Does he not see how his wife treats his own mother? One evening, as Grandma Martha scrubbed the bathroom floor on her hands and knees, she heard Grace talking loudly on her phone in the bedroom. "Yes, my friend, everything is going according to plan," Grace said with a laugh that sounded like broken glass. "That old woman does everything for me now. She cooks, she cleans, she washes, even my underwear. And my foolish husband just sits there like a wooden statue, doing nothing." The scrubbing brush fell from Grandma Martha's hands. She pressed her ear closer to the door. "But why doesn't he stop you?" asked the voice on the phone. Grace's laughter became even more wicked. "Because he cannot. I have made sure of that. Every morning, I put something special in his tea, something that makes his mind weak and his tongue heavy. He will never speak against me now, no matter what I do to his precious mother." Grandma Martha's blood turned cold. Her daughter-in-law was poisoning her son. But with what, and how could she prove it? From that night, the old woman watched everything more carefully. She noticed how Charles's eyes looked foggy every morning after drinking his tea. She saw how he moved like a person walking through thick mud. She watched how he opened his mouth to speak sometimes, then closed it again, as if invisible hands were holding his tongue. "My poor son," she whispered to herself one night, lying on the thin mat that served as her bed in the small storage room where Grace had made her sleep. "What has this wicked woman done to you?" The mistreatment got worse every day. Grace made her wash dishes until her fingers bled. She forced her to clean the house 3 times a day, even when it was already spotless. She gave her only one small meal per day, usually the scraps left over after she and Charles had eaten. "Mama, you are so slow," Grace would scream, throwing dirty clothes at her feet. "My friends' housegirls work faster than you. Maybe you are getting too old and useless." But the worst part was watching her son. Charles would sit there, staring at his mother with confused eyes, as if he wanted to help but couldn't remember how. Sometimes his mouth would twitch and he would start to stand up, but then he would sit back down heavily, like something was pulling him back to his chair. "Charles, tell your mother to cook more food," Grace would command. "We are expecting visitors tomorrow." And Charles would nod slowly and repeat the words to his mother, his voice flat and empty like a broken radio. Grandma Martha's heart broke a little more each day. But she was not just sad. She was angry. Very, very angry. And she was determined to find out exactly what Grace was doing to her son. One morning, while Grace was at the market and Charles was at work, Grandma Martha searched their bedroom. She looked under the mattress, inside the wardrobe, behind the mirror, everywhere she could think of. But she found nothing strange. Just as she was about to give up, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from under the bed. She got down on her knees and looked. Far back in the corner, almost hidden by dust and shadows, was a small clay pot, the kind used by native doctors and witches for dark magic. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. The pot was warm to touch, even though the room was cool. Strange symbols were carved into its sides, and it smelled like rotten eggs and dead animals. "What is this thing?" she whispered, turning it around in her hands. Just then, she heard the front gate creak open. Grace was back from the market. Quickly, Grandma Martha pushed the pot back under the bed and rushed to the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might jump out of her chest. "Mama," Grace called, "come and help me with these bags." As she helped carry the groceries, Grandma Martha's mind raced. That pot under the bed. She was sure it was connected to whatever was happening to her son. But what was inside it? And how could she find out without Grace catching her? That night she barely slept. She lay on her mat, thinking and planning. She had to get another look at that pot. She had to find out what dark secret her daughter-in-law was hiding. The next morning, Grace prepared Charles's tea as usual. But this time, Grandma Martha watched more carefully. She saw her daughter-in-law add sugar, milk, and then something else. A small pinch of dark powder from a tiny bag hidden in her purse. "So that's how she does it," Grandma Martha thought. "She poisons his tea every single morning." But the pot under the bed, that was something else entirely. Something much more dangerous. For the next 3 days, she waited for the perfect opportunity. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, both Grace and Charles left the house. Grace to visit her sister, and Charles to work overtime at his office job. Grandma Martha's hands trembled as she knelt beside the bed and pulled out the clay pot. This time, she was determined to open it and see what was inside, no matter how scared she felt. The pot had a tight lid held down with red thread and cowrie shells. As she untied the thread, the smell got stronger, like something dead and rotting. Her stomach twisted with fear and disgust, but she kept going. When the lid finally came off, Grandma Martha screamed so loud that the neighbors' chickens started squawking in alarm. Inside the pot was the most horrible thing she had ever seen in her 72 years of life. There were pieces of hair, her son's hair, which she recognized from all the years she had cut it when he was a boy. There were his fingernail clippings. There was a piece of cloth from his favorite shirt. And at the bottom of the pot, floating in a thick, black liquid that bubbled like it was alive, was a small photograph of Charles with pins stuck through his eyes and mouth. But that wasn't the worst part. Wrapped around the photograph was a piece of paper with words written in what looked like blood. The words made her blood freeze in her veins. "Let Charles Okafor be blind to his mother's pain. Let him be deaf to her cries. Let his tongue be heavy when she needs his protection. Let his heart be cold toward the woman who gave him life. Let him love only Grace until his mother dies of heartbreak and leaves this house forever." Grandma Martha dropped the pot, and it crashed to the floor with the sound of breaking thunder. The dark liquid spilled across the concrete, hissing and bubbling like acid. The photograph of her son curled up and turned to ash. The hair and fingernails scattered everywhere like tiny, evil insects. As the pot broke, something else happened, something that made her scream again. She heard footsteps running up the stairs. Heavy, angry footsteps that could only belong to one person. Grace was back, and from the sound of those footsteps, she was very, very angry. "Mama, what have you done?" Grace's scream filled the house like the cry of an angry spirit. She burst into the bedroom, her eyes wild and her face twisted with rage. When she saw the broken pot and the dark liquid still bubbling on the floor, she looked like she might faint. But instead of fainting, she did something that shocked Grandma Martha even more. She fell to her knees and began gathering the pieces of the broken pot with her bare hands, cutting her fingers on the sharp clay. Blood mixed with the dark liquid, and she was crying not sad tears, but angry tears that made her look like a mad woman. "No, no, no," she wailed, holding the broken pieces against her chest. 20 years of work. 20 years of planning. You stupid old woman. Do you know what you have done? Grandma Martha stepped backward, her heart pounding. 20 years? What do you mean 20 years? Grace looked up at her with eyes full of hatred. Her beautiful face was now ugly with anger, and when she spoke, her voice sounded different, older, colder, like the voice of a witch from the old stories. "You think I just married your son by accident?" she hissed. "You think I fell in love with that weak, foolish boy? Ha! I have been watching your family since I was 15 years old, waiting for the perfect time to strike." The old woman felt her legs go weak. What are you talking about?" Grace stood up, still holding the broken pieces. Her hands were bleeding, but she didn't seem to notice. "Your husband, Charles's father? Do you remember him? Do you remember how he died?" Grandma Martha's eyes grew wide. Her husband had died in a car accident when Charles was only 10 years old. It had been the worst day of her life. "What does my husband have to do with this?" "Everything," Grace screamed. "He killed my father. Your precious husband was driving drunk that night 25 years ago, and he crashed into my father's motorcycle. My father died, and your husband just drove away like nothing happened." The room seemed to spin around Grandma Martha. "No, that's not true. My husband died in an accident. The police said what they were paid to say." Grace interrupted. "But I know the truth. My mother told me before she died. She made me promise to get revenge on your family. She said I should make you all suffer the way we suffered." Grandma Martha felt like she couldn't breathe. But my husband is dead. How can you get revenge on a dead man?" Grace's smile was cold and evil. "By destroying everything he loved. His wife, his son, his family name. I have been planning this for 20 long years." The old woman sank onto the bed, her mind reeling. "So you never loved my son? This whole marriage? It was all fake. Love." Grace laughed, and the sound made Grandma Martha's skin crawl. "I hate your son. I hate his stupid face, his weak voice, his pathetic dreams of becoming a successful businessman. But I needed to get close to your family to destroy it from the inside." She walked closer, still holding the broken pot pieces. "First, I made your son fall in love with me. That was easy. Men are so stupid when they think a beautiful woman likes them. Then I married him and moved into this house. Then I started my real work. The pot," Grandma Martha whispered. "The pot was given to me by the strongest native doctor in Abaddon. It took me 3 years to save money for it, and another 2 years to collect everything I needed: your son's hair, his nails, his blood from a small cut I gave him while he slept. The magic was supposed to make him hate you slowly, until he would throw you out of this house and never speak to you again." Grandma Martha felt sick to her stomach. "And then what?" "Then I would make him lose his job, make him get sick, make him have accidents. I would destroy his life piece by piece, just like your husband destroyed mine. And you would watch it all happen, knowing you could do nothing to save your only child." The room was quiet except for the sound of both women breathing heavily. Outside, Grandma Martha could hear children playing in the street, their laughter sounding strange and far away after hearing such terrible words. "But why did you make me suffer too?" the old woman asked. "Why didn't you just use magic to make Charles throw me out immediately?" Grace's eyes sparkled with cruel pleasure. "Because that would have been too easy. I wanted you to suffer first. I wanted to see you work like a slave in your own son's house. I wanted to watch you cry yourself to sleep every night, wondering why your beloved child had become so cold to you." She leaned closer, her bloody hands leaving marks on the bedsheet. "I wanted to break your heart before I broke your spirit. I wanted you to die slowly, from sadness and exhaustion, so that when Charles finally threw you out, you would have nowhere to go and no strength left to survive." Grandma Martha felt anger rising in her chest like fire. This evil woman had been torturing her family for years, all because of something that happened before Charles was even born. Something he had nothing to do with. "You are wicked," she said, standing up with more strength than she had felt in months. "Even if what you say about my husband is true, my son is innocent. He was just a child when your father died. Why should he pay for something he didn't do?" "Because that's how revenge works," Grace shouted. "An eye for an eye, a family for a family. Your husband took my father away from me, so I will take your son away from you." Suddenly, they heard the front door slam downstairs. "Grace." "Mama." "I'm home," Charles's voice called from the living room. Both women froze. Grace looked at the broken pot pieces in her hands, then at the dark liquid still bubbling on the floor. Fear flashed across her face for the first time. "He's home early," she whispered. "The magic." When the pot broke, the spell must have started wearing off. He might be able to think clearly again. Heavy footsteps started climbing the stairs. But these footsteps sounded different from the slow, tired steps they had been hearing for months. These steps were quick and strong, like the steps of the old Charles, the son Grandma Martha remembered from before his marriage. "Grace." Charles's voice was getting closer. "I had the strangest feeling at work today, like someone was calling my name, like my mother needed me. Is everything okay?" Grace dropped the pot pieces and grabbed Grandma Martha's arm with her bloody fingers. "Listen to me, old woman. You will not tell him anything about what you found here. If you say even one word about the pot or the magic, I will make sure something very bad happens to you. Let go of me." Grandma Martha tried to pull away, but Grace's grip was surprisingly strong. "I still have other ways to hurt your family," Grace hissed. "I have friends who practice even darker magic than this pot. I can make your son have an accident at work. I can make him get very sick. I can even make him—" "Make me what?" Both women spun around. Charles was standing in the doorway, and he looked more awake and alert than he had in months. His eyes were clear and sharp, and when he saw his mother's frightened face and his wife's bloody hands, his expression changed to confusion and anger. "What is going on here?" he demanded, stepping into the room. Then he saw the broken pot pieces and the dark liquid on the floor. "What is that smell? And why does this room stink like rotten eggs?" Grace let go of Grandma Martha's arm and tried to smile, but her face was too twisted with panic to look natural. "Oh, my dear husband, you're home early. Your mother. She accidentally broke one of my cooking pots, and—" "That is not a cooking pot," Charles said, walking closer. He knelt down and picked up one of the larger pieces. Strange symbols were carved into the clay, and when he touched them, his face went pale. "This looks like something from a native doctor." He looked up at his wife, then at his mother. For the first time in months, Grandma Martha could see intelligence and awareness in her son's eyes. The fog that had clouded his mind was finally lifting. "Mama," he said softly, "tell me the truth. What is this thing?" Grandma Martha looked at Grace, who was shaking her head frantically and mouthing the word no. She looked at her son, who was staring at her with love and concern, emotions she hadn't seen in his face for so long. And she made a decision that would change everything. "My son," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Sit down. I have something very important to tell you about your wife." Grace's face went white as chalk. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't. You don't understand what you're doing." But Grandma Martha had been silent for too long. She had suffered too much. And now, with her son finally able to listen, she was going to tell him everything. "This pot," she began, pointing to the broken pieces, "was hidden under your bed. Inside it was your hair, your fingernails, your photograph, and a curse written in blood." Charles's eyes grew wider with each word. "Your wife has been putting poison in your morning tea to make your mind weak. She has been using dark magic to make you treat me badly. And she has been planning to destroy our entire family because she believes your father killed her father 25 years ago." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Charles looked at his wife. "Is this true?" Grace opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked like a trapped animal, desperate and dangerous. And that's when she did something that no one expected. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small glass bottle filled with the same dark liquid that had been in the pot. Before anyone could stop her, she threw the bottle at Grandma Martha's feet. The bottle shattered, and black smoke began rising from the floor, filling the room with a smell so terrible that all three of them started choking and gasping for air. "If I can't have my revenge one way," Grace screamed through the smoke, "then I'll have it another." The smoke was getting thicker and darker. Grandma Martha felt her eyes burning and her throat closing up. Through the black fog, she could barely see her son reaching toward her. "Mama," he coughed, "take my hand." But the smoke was like a living thing, pushing them apart and making it impossible to breathe. And somewhere in that darkness, Grace was laughing, a sound more terrifying than any scream. What was in that bottle? And would any of them survive to find out? The black smoke filled the room like an evil spirit, but something strange happened. Instead of making them sick or weak, the smoke began to swirl around Grace like a tornado, lifting her hair and making her clothes flutter wildly. "What's happening?" Charles coughed, grabbing his mother's hand and pulling her toward the door. But before they could escape, the smoke suddenly disappeared, sucked back into the broken bottle pieces on the floor. The room became quiet and clear again, and when they looked at Grace, they gasped in shock. She looked completely different. Her smooth, young skin was now wrinkled and old. Her shiny black hair had turned gray and thin. Her straight back was now bent like an old woman's. She looked like she had aged 30 years in 30 seconds. "No!" she screamed, looking at her hands in horror. "This wasn't supposed to happen. The magic was supposed to hurt you, not me." Grandma Martha stared at her daughter-in-law, or the person who used to be her daughter-in-law. "What is happening to you?" Grace fell to her knees, crying. But these weren't angry tears anymore. They were tears of fear and desperation. "The magic," she whispered. "When you broke the first pot, it started turning back on me. And when I broke the second bottle, all the dark magic I've been using for years is now coming back to punish me." She looked up at them with eyes that were now cloudy and tired. "This is what I really look like. The magic was keeping me young and beautiful. But now that it's broken, I'm showing my true age and my true heart." Charles stepped closer, his face full of confusion and anger. "How old are you really?" 47, Grace admitted, her voice now cracked and weak like an old woman's. "I used magic to look young so you would fall in love with me. Everything about me was fake, my beauty, my smile, even my voice." Grandma Martha felt a mix of satisfaction and pity. The woman who had made her life so miserable now looked small and broken on the floor. But she also felt sorry for her, because she could see that Grace had been carrying hatred and anger for so many years that it had poisoned her own heart. "Why didn't you just report my husband to the police if you really believed he killed your father?" Grandma Martha asked gently. "Why did you choose this dark path of revenge?" Grace wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Because I was young and angry, and my mother filled my head with hatred. She told me that the police wouldn't listen to a poor family like ours, and that rich people like your husband could buy their way out of trouble. She looked up at them with regret in her eyes. But the truth is, I don't even know if your husband really killed my father. I only have my mother's word, and she was so angry and sad after Papa died that she might have been wrong about what happened that night. The room became very quiet. Outside, they could hear the evening call to prayer from a nearby mosque, and the sound of children being called home for dinner. Normal sounds from a normal world, so different from the strange and terrible things that had been happening in this house. Charles sat down heavily on the bed, running his hands through his hair. So for 3 years of marriage, I haven't been myself. For 3 years, I've been treating my own mother like a servant because of magic spells and poison. He looked at his mother with tears in his eyes. Mama, I'm so sorry. I don't remember most of what happened, but I know I hurt you. I know I let her make you suffer, and I couldn't stop it. Grandma Martha sat beside her son and took his hands in hers. They were the same hands she had held when he was a little boy with scraped knees and bad dreams. Now he was a grown man with a scraped heart and a nightmare marriage, but he was still her child. It wasn't your fault, my son, she said softly. You were under a spell. The important thing is that you're free now, and you can think clearly again. Grace struggled to stand up, her old joints creaking like rusty hinges. I need to leave, she said quietly. I need to go back to my village and ask the native doctor to help me undo what I've done to myself. Wait, Charles said, standing up. Before you go, I need to know something. Did you ever feel anything real for me? Even just a little bit. Grace looked at him for a long moment. In her aged face, they could see a flicker of something. Maybe sadness, maybe regret. At first, no, she admitted. You were just a tool for my revenge. But after the first year, sometimes when you would bring me flowers or tell me about your dreams for the future, I would forget why I was there. I would almost feel normal, happy, even. She touched her wrinkled cheek with wonder, as if she couldn't believe what she was feeling. Maybe if I hadn't been so full of hatred, we could have had a real marriage. Maybe I could have learned to love you for real. But you chose revenge instead, Charles said sadly. Yes, she nodded. And look what it cost me. My youth, my beauty, my chance at happiness, everything. Grandma Martha stood up and walked to the small table where she kept her Bible and her rosary. She picked up a small bottle of holy water that the priest had given her last Christmas. Before you leave, she said, turning back to Grace, let me do something for you. Grace looked suspicious. What? Let me pray for you. Let me ask God to forgive you and to help you find peace. Why would you do that for me? Grace asked, her voice breaking. After everything I did to you? Grandma Martha smiled sadly. Because carrying hatred in your heart is like carrying poison. It hurts you more than it hurts the person you hate. I don't want to end up like you, old and bitter and full of regret. She opened the holy water and made the sign of the cross. And because if your father really was killed by my husband, then I'm sorry for your loss. No child should have to grow up without a father. Grace began to cry again. But this time they were different tears, cleaner tears, like rain washing dust from leaves. I'm sorry too, she whispered. I'm sorry for everything. Grandma Martha sprinkled a few drops of holy water on Grace's head and said a quiet prayer. As she did, something beautiful happened. Some of the hardness left Grace's face, and although she still looked old, she looked more peaceful. The magic can't make you young again, Grandma Martha said gently, but forgiveness can make you free. Grace packed her few belongings in a small bag. As she was leaving, she turned back one more time. Charles, she said, you're a good man. Find yourself a wife who will love you for real. Someone who will make your mother happy too. What will you do now? He asked. I'll go back to my village and take care of my mother's grave. I'll try to live the rest of my life in peace, without magic and without hatred. She paused at the door. And maybe someday, I'll find the courage to discover the real truth about what happened to my father. After she left, Charles and his mother sat together in the kitchen, sharing a simple dinner of rice and stew. but it tasted better than any meal they had eaten in 3 years. "Mama," Charles said, "I want to make up for lost time. Tomorrow, I'm going to take you to the hospital for a checkup, and then we're going to the market to buy you new clothes and anything else you need." "You don't need to buy me anything, my son. Having you back is enough. And I'm going to look for a new job. Something that pays better so we can move to a nicer house. A house where you'll have your own bedroom with a comfortable bed. Not a storage room with a mat on the floor." Grandma Martha smiled. "That would be nice. But most importantly, I want you to find a good wife someday. Someone who will love us both." "I will, Mama. But first I need to learn how to be myself again. The real Charles. Not the man who was controlled by magic." As they talked and planned for the future, they heard a knock at the door. When Charles opened it, they found their neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, standing there with a worried expression. "Charles, my brother," she said, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right? We heard shouting earlier, and we saw a lot of black smoke coming from your window." Charles looked at his mother, and they both smiled. "Everything is fine now, Mrs. Johnson," he said. "We just had to clean out some old things that were making our house unhealthy. But we're much better now." "Good, good," she nodded. "And Charles, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you look different tonight. More awake. More like the young man I remember from before your marriage." "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. I feel like myself again." After the neighbor left, Charles and his mother sat on the front porch, watching the stars come out over Lagos. The night air was cool and clean, so different from the heavy, poisonous atmosphere that had filled their house for so long. "Mama," Charles said quietly, "do you think Grace was telling the truth about Papa?" Grandma Martha was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, my son. Your father was a good man, but he did drink sometimes when he was worried about money. It's possible that something happened that night. If it's true, doesn't that mean her anger was justified? Her anger, maybe, but not her methods. If she had come to us as an honest person and told us her story, we could have talked about it like adults. We could have found a way to honor her father's memory or help her family. Instead, she chose lies and magic and hatred." She patted his hand. "The important thing is that the cycle of revenge ends with us. We won't pass hatred on to the next generation." As they sat there together, both of them felt something they hadn't felt in years: peace. The dark magic was broken, the lies were exposed, and the family was healing. But their story wasn't completely over yet. The next morning, as Grandma Martha was hanging clothes on the line, she noticed something strange. Where Grace had spilled the dark liquid from the pot, new plants were growing through the concrete floor. But these weren't ordinary plants. They had bright white flowers that glowed softly in the morning light. She called Charles to come and see. "What do you think it means?" he asked, kneeling down to touch one of the glowing petals. "I think," his mother said with a wise smile, "it means that even the darkest magic can be transformed into something beautiful when it meets forgiveness and love." The white flowers continued to grow and spread, and soon their small house became famous in the neighborhood. People would come from far and wide to see the miracle flowers, and to hear the story of how an old woman's courage and a mother's love had defeated dark magic. But that is a story for another day. For now, Charles and his mother were content to live simply and peacefully, grateful for second chances and the power of truth to set people free. And somewhere in a small village far from Lagos, an aging woman named Grace was learning to find peace without magic, revenge, or hatred, discovering that the greatest power of all was the power to forgive yourself and start again. The end. But if you want to know more about what happened to the miracle flowers, or if Grace ever found the real truth about her father's death, or if Charles found a new wife who would love his mother too, well, that would be another story entirely. Comment Part 2.